Hello, I'm really glad you're here. On this channel, I share simple, quiet stories about life, love, and the little feelings we all go through. If that sounds like something you enjoy, don't forget to subscribe. Every subscriber gives me a little more encouragement to keep telling these stories. Now, let's begin today's story. Boston in early November wasn't cold in the way winter is harsh and biting, but cold like a weary reminder the year was ending and no one was really ready to say goodbye. Outside the hospital window, rain tapped steadily on the metal awning, like a melancholy instrument only played after midnight. It had been raining for days. No one even noticed anymore. Natalie set her coffee down, rubbing her hands together for warmth. Night shifts in the ER emergency room were long, damp and draining, but she was used to that. 12 years a doctor, 9 in Boston, 4 as lead attending. Every incision, every heart monitor beep, every scream, every silent kind of pain, she knew them all by heart. The only thing she never got used to was this feeling of living between two worlds. In one, she was a doctor. In the other, she didn't know who she was. The emergency alarm blared. Natalie shot up without waiting. No one needed to call her. That sound sliced straight through exhaustion. She could already hear the ambulance sirens, wheels screeching over the rain-slicked floors of the hallway. 2 EMTs burst in, one male, one female, pushing a stretcher while shouting over the commotion.
Car crash on the Longfellow Bridge, male. About 30 rapid blood loss. Stab wound to the chest. No ID unresponsive.
Natalie was already at the stretcher. Her movements were automatic, eyes scanning vitals, fingers checking pulse and chest, voice giving clear, firm orders.
Check pupillary response. Get a blood draw now. Prep for surgery. Possible internal organ damage.
Then she froze. That face, through the blood and rain-matted hair. His eyes were open, looking straight at her. It wasn't a plea for help. It was recognition, as if they'd met before, in a breath barely audible through the chaos, through sirens. Footsteps, the steady drip of blood onto the floor. He moved his lips and whispered.
It's you again.
The words hit her like a punch to the chest, and for one fleeting second, the world around her paused, the flickering fluorescent lights overhead, the beeping trucks outside, the wind through the half-shut door. All of it stopped them. There was only her and that sentence. A nurse said something she didn't hear. Natalie kept staring at the man's face. No, impossible. Well, she had never seen him before, or not once. But why? Then why did it feel like she had held him, like she had cried in his arms? She shook her head, forcing herself back into reality. There was no time for delusions. This man was dying. She pressed her hand to the wound, feeling the strange rhythm of his pulse beneath soaked fabric. His shirt was drenched in blood, yet the vitals were holding, pupils still reactive. That didn't add up. The male EMT leaned in, breathless.
No blood pooling in the lungs. Looks like the stab missed the heart, but it's deep. Shirt's torn from the right side.
Apply pressure. Start an IV. Get adrenaline ready. Move. Now.
As they wheeled him out, Natalie turned once more. He was still watching her, saying nothing, but his eyes held on to something fragile, like he was trying not to let go. The trauma room was cold, like always. Scalpels, syringes, clamps, everything was precise, everything was sterile. But her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the scalpel. Just a little. She told herself it was stress, lack of sleep, a normal physiological response. Nothing more. But deep down, she knew better. That voice, that face, those eyes. She had seen them before. Not in real life, not in a dream, but somewhere deeper, like a memory, from a life that wasn't hers, like an old photo buried under a bed, dusty, but undeniable. And in the second between a cut and a stitch, it came rushing back. A night, a stone bridge, the glow of an oil lamp, a man trembling in her arms, oh, her clothes soaked with blood. And he had said,
If there's a next time, I'll be the one to save you.
but that couldn't be real. She had never seen a stone bridge, never worn a hand-stitched square collar dress, never loved someone enough to hear words like that. Natalie closed the incision. Sutures done. His name, Lucas. According to the temporary file, he was still alive. His body fought back stronger than expected. Breathing had stabilized, too fast, too unusual. Too fast. She peeled off her gloves, washed her hands, leaned against the OR wall. Looking up at the ceiling light, she closed her eyes. And in that stillness, the question returned, where have I seen him before?
And why? Why did those words break something inside my heart?
The surgery wrapped up close to 5 a.m. The rain hadn't let up, in fact. It was heavier than it had been at midnight. The hospital hallway lights cast a cold, yellow glow across the floor, streaked with wet footprints and silence. Natalie didn't head to the rest area. She walked straight to the inpatient record archive, a room rarely visited at this hour. That was exactly why she chose it. She didn't know what she was looking for. Her hands moved on their own computer on. System login. Typing in the temporary name, Lucas Doe. That's how the hospital identified John Does. Men with no name, with. But when her fingers hit those keys, her palms broke into sweat, like she had typed something forbidden. The info was minimal male, approximately 36 foot tall, blood type O, no scars, no tattoos, no ID, no companion, no emergency contact. Natalie scrolled through the EMT report. A single line in italics caught her breath. Patient unresponsive to verbal stimuli, but lip movement detected. Audible phrase, you. Again. It's you. She shivered. They'd heard it too. She turned back toward the old archives, the paper files, decades old, where lost or deleted cases ended up. Her instincts weren't medical anymore. They were something deeper, primal, like chasing the end of a dream that had never finished. It took nearly half an hour. She pulled the drawer labeled 2016, the year she interned in Chicago. Somehow. Her fingers picked the folder that smelled of old paper and dried coffee. And then she saw it. A car accident victim, male, no ID, no documentation. The page was yellowed with time. The photo attached was printed from a fax, grainy and grey.
But that face was him.
No name, no attending physician, no discharge summary. The note stopped after 48 hours. Only a line scribbled in the corner awoke at 4:12 a.m. First words, not her again. Natalie's heart pounded. She collapsed into the chair, eyes frozen on the file. 2016. She was just an intern. There was no way she had been his doctor. But why was his face turned like that, like he was looking at someone standing by his bed, like he was looking at her? A memory flickered, hazy like smoke. A hospital room. Dim light. A slow heartbeat, echoing in the quiet. A hand lifted but not touching. A whisper.
You don't remember me anymore, do you?
Natalie inhaled sharply, snapping herself back to the present. She pulled up the intern night logs from that year. There it was, her name. ICU rotation. The exact night he woke up. She was there, that night. She shut the computer, cradled the file, and stepped out into the hallway. The sky had lightened. The rain had stopped. But the pavement still glistened. Morning light streamed through the corridor windows like it was tearing through a dream. But There was something she couldn't deny anymore. She had seen that man before. More than once. This wasn't coincidence, this wasn't delusion, and this wasn't random. Natalie stopped outside the ICU room. Lucas was inside. She didn't enter, just watched through the glass. The man was sleeping, peaceful, no pain on his face. But his left hand rested gently on his chest, like he was holding on to something ancient. And Natalie knew this wasn't within the bounds of medicine anymore. This wasn't just a doctor and a patient. This was the beginning of something she had buried lifetimes ago, something that man had once called.
We used to belong to each other.
Natalie left the hospital when the sky had already brightened, though the clouds still hung heavy, like the night refused to let go. She didn't drive home. Instead, she walked, her dark coat trailing behind her in the quiet steps. Boston at dawn was still and soft, like the city itself was trapped somewhere between what's real and what's just beginning. She told no one about what happened last night, not her colleagues, not the nurses, definitely not the department chief. This wasn't medical anymore. This was personal, between her and a man she didn't know, but somehow had known. When she reached her apartment in Beacon Hill, the place she had lived alone for more than 7 years, Natalie entered without turning on the lights. She dropped her bag onto the chair, tossed her coat over the armrest, and slid down to the wooden floor like only the cool touch of oak could steady her breath. She closed her eyes. Behind her eyelids, a golden, watery light appeared, the sound of trickling water. A breeze brushed her cheek. It was vivid, real. She saw herself standing on a stone bridge below. A greenish stream flowed quietly. Around her, moss-covered walls, narrow wooden steps, and the sound of footsteps running toward her. It wasn't fragments of a dream, it was a full memory. She turned her head and saw him, Lucas, but not in modern clothes. He wore a white silk shirt, long sleeves, stained with blood. His face was frantic until he saw her. Then it softened.
You're here, finally. You're here.
Natalie said nothing. She felt her heart racing, but it wasn't the heart of her present self. She could feel herself inside that other version of Natalie, one from another time, another life, with a love too familiar to be new. He stepped closer, knelt before her, clutching her hands like he was about to be swept away.
I've searched for you through lifetimes, through deaths and rebirths. You don't remember, do you?
She wanted to speak, but her mouth wouldn't form words. Not from fear, but because something invisible held her back. A thin sheet of glass between them. Lucas reached into his pocket and pulled out a necklace. The pendant was a worn silver coin, its edges dulled by time, with a crescent moon carved into the center.
You promised. If the day ever came when we didn't remember each other, just touch the moon, and you'd remember.
She reached out, but the moment her fingers touched the pendant, everything shattered. Light broke like falling glass. Natalie's eyes flew open. Sweat clung to her forehead, her heart pounding. She was still in her apartment. Present-day Boston, morning light slipping through the blinds. She looked around. Everything was still there, the bookshelf, the table, the sofa, the wall clock. But she knew she had just been somewhere real. Not a dream, not her imagination. She stood and walked to the mirror, looked into her eyes, and in that reflection, something had changed. She was no longer yesterday's Natalie. She stepped toward her desk, opened the second drawer, the one filled with old student mementos. Her fingers brushed past old bus tickets, dried out highlighters, forgotten birthday cards until they touched something. A small old silver coin, worn edges, a crescent moon etched faintly in the center. She didn't remember where she got it, didn't remember anyone giving it to her, but it was here. It had always been here. Her hand trembled. She closed her fingers tightly around the coin. Then she whispered to no one, or maybe to herself.
I promised something, didn't I?
No answer, just the growing morning light stretching across the hardwood floor. And the soft chime of her alarm. It was time to return to the hospital. But Natalie knew she wouldn't be going back as just a doctor anymore. She would return as someone stepping into forgotten memory where everything waited to be remembered. When Natalie returned to the hospital, it was nearly 7 a.m. The Boston sky remained heavy with thick grey clouds. No rain, but gusts of wind rushed through the hospital corridor, making her pull her coat tighter. In her hand, she still held the silver coin, a token of a memory she couldn't name. She walked straight to the ICU. No staff meeting, no check-in at the nurse station. Her instinct was louder than any protocol. She knew the moment she walked through that door, something would change. Lucas was still in the isolation room, hooked to wires and monitors. A nurse on duty greeted her but said nothing more. They all knew she was the attending. None of them knew why she stood frozen behind the glass, watching him for over 5 minutes before entering. She disinfected her hands, put on a clean white coat, and stepped in. The room was unnervingly quiet, as if sound itself wasn't allowed here. Lucas breathed steadily, eyes closed, skin pale. But as she approached the bed, his eyes opened, not startled, not confused, or as if he had been awake all along, waiting for this exact moment.
You came.
Natalie stopped. Her hand froze mid-air, still holding her stethoscope. His eyes, pale blue, deep like spring water, didn't look at her like a patient looks at a doctor. He looked at her like someone who had waited across lifetimes.
When did you wake up?
Not long after you left, but I knew you'd come back.
His voice was low and steady, not at all like someone recovering from major surgery. Each word chosen, no panic, no rush. Natalie stepped back slightly, trying to steady her voice.
Do you know who I am?
Not who, but what we once were to each other.
Her heart skipped. She bit her lip, moved closer, checked the vitals monitor, adjusted the blood pressure cuff. She needed to do something, anything, to keep her hands from shaking.
You're saying things I can't understand. I'm your doctor. You're my patient, that's all.
You said those exact words once, a long time ago, when you were treating me after I fell off my horse near the border.
Natalie froze.
Fell. Off a horse.
Lucas nodded softly, eyes never leaving hers.
I was a ferryman. You were a healer at the monastery beyond the woods. You saved me, hid me, took care of me. But we weren't allowed to love. Don't you remember?
Natalie took a full step back. Her heartbeat thudded violently so she couldn't breathe.
This sounds like a fairy tale.
It's not a story. It's my memory. And yours. We belong to each other. Across lives. I always died first. You always saved me. And then, I lost you again.
Natalie sank into the chair beside the bed. Her fingers clenched the silver coin in her coat pocket.
This coin doesn't mean anything.
She pulled it out, placed it in her palm. Lucas saw it, and a slow, deep smile crossed his face like something long lost had been returned.
That's our wishing token. You carved the moon. I carved your name inside with my own blood.
Natalie raised the coin to her eyes. For the first time, she noticed a faint mark on the inner side, not letters, but a deep scar etched straight into the metal, like a fingernail dragged across it. Lucas reached out and touched her wrist, cold but terrifyingly familiar.
Don't be afraid, Natalie. You're not losing your mind. You're just beginning to remember. And this time, it'll be different. This time, I'll be the one who saves you.
She pulled her hand back and stood up.
I need time.
Lucas nodded, no trace of blame in his expression.
I know. but don't let time steal you from me again.
She didn't answer. She walked out fast. The door shut behind her. She leaned against the hallway wall, gasping for breath.
That voice, those words, that feeling, none of it made sense, but none of it could be denied either.
Natalie returned to the break room. She opened her phone, pulled up old emails, photos from her intern days in Chicago, and there it was, a photo with an unidentified patient, eyes closed, face turned to the side. It was Lucas. She zoomed in on his wrist in the photo, a faint scar. Same spot as the fresh stitches on his arm today. She whispered.
If this is real, then why did I forget?
A day after their second meeting, Natalie returned to the hospital with her mind so tangled she no longer knew what was real. The night before, she had dreamed of a forest. In the forest stood a wooden house with a slate roof. Inside, every object was covered with white cloths except for a leather-bound book at the center of the table. She opened to the first page and saw handwritten words, old ink, crooked letters, the 8th time. When she woke up, the silver coin was still clutched in her palm, and in her head was Lucas's voice. You've saved me. 7 times. This is the 8th. And this time, let me save you. She told no one, didn't mention the dream, but something pulled her back to the ICU that morning. Lucas lay there, somewhere between sleep and waking, no sign of pain. But the clarity in his gaze from yesterday was gone. She thought he had forgotten, or was simply sleeping. But the moment her hand touched his wrist to check his pulse, he whispered,
Behind the bookshelf. The key. The address is in the letter.
Natalie flinched. She stepped back, staring at him. His eyes were still closed. Not a twitch. She had no idea what it meant, but the voice felt more real than anything else. That evening, back at her apartment, she stood before her bookshelf for nearly an hour. Finally, she made up her mind. She pulled out the second row from the bottom. One book at a time. She'd never done that before. She'd turn. And behind the dusty books, just as he'd said, was a narrow recess in the wall, hidden by a sliding wooden panel. Inside, an old envelope, yellowed with age, unsealed. She opened it. A bronze key, antique in design, and a piece of paper. Ink smudged and barely legible. 9 Barrow Hollow, Sherwood Township, PA. She frowned. Sherwood Township. She'd never heard of it. She grabbed her phone and searched on Google Maps. No such address. No Barrow Hollow anywhere. Sherwood Township did exist, but it was a remote, near wilderness region in Pennsylvania with little to no detailed information. She tried Street View, only trees, unnamed roads, a few scattered wooden houses. How did Lucas know? And more importantly, how did she once have that address? She sat up all night, thinking, and the next morning, instead of heading to the hospital, she packed her bag, took the key, the coin, and just the essentials. She wasn't sure if this was rational, but for the first time in years, she didn't follow logic, she followed her heart. The drive from Boston to northern Pennsylvania took nearly 7 hours, winding through stretches of fading autumn forests. As her car turned onto the side road that led toward Sherwood Township, the GPS went dark, no signal, no people. She followed printed directions she had prepared the night before, cross-checking with a 1947 residential map she'd found in a digital archive. On that map, Barrow Hollow still existed, a goal, forgotten road, erased from modern records. By mid-afternoon, her car emerged from the thinning woods. The road grew bumpy. Then, like stepping into a memory, it appeared. The house from her dream. Wooden, 2 stories, slate roof, white curtains in the windows, surrounded by an old fence draped in vines, a crooked wooden sign near the gate, the letters barely legible, Barrow Hollow, No. 9. Natalie's hands trembled as she took out the key. She stepped forward, slid it into the front door. It fit. The door creaked open, and the scent of old timber, faded cloth, and dust spilled out. The house looked untouched for years. Yet nothing was out of place. Armchairs, tea table, books on the shelf, photographs on the wall, black and white portraits of a man in a vintage shirt and a woman wearing a round hat. She moved slowly through the living room, into the kitchen, everything blanketed in dust, but no cobwebs, as if someone had been quietly cleaning from time to time. On the dining table was a leather-bound book, exactly like in the dream. She sat down, opened the first page, the 8th time. She turned. The next, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer here, and you've begun to remember. Each page held a brief entry, like journal fragments, the handwriting identical to Lucas's. First time, 1349, Florence. You were the nun guarding the abbey gates. I was a merchant, dying of plague. Second time, 1793, Paris. You were a bookseller's daughter. I was a wanted man. Third time, 1865, Georgia. You were a battlefield nurse. I was a Confederate soldier. She flipped faster, each lifetime a slice of love, loss, and death. In every one. He was the one who died. The last entry written recently was shaky. This time, I remembered before you did. You saved me. As always. But if you're reading this, give me a chance. Let me be the one to save you, just once. Natalie placed her hand on her chest. Her heart was racing, fast, too fast. Suddenly, wind chimes echoed from the porch. She startled, rushed to the door. Lucas was standing at the gate. Natalie stood frozen in the doorway, her hand still resting on the weathered wood frame. Through the misty haze of the forest afternoon, Lucas stood by the crooked gate, his grey coat soaked with rain, hair tousled, face pale, but his eyes were unchanged. The same eyes that followed her from the ER, through her dreams, and all the way here. The rain began to fall, not hard, but steady and cold. Droplets hit the wooden fence, the porch roof, her cheek with a feeling that carried more than weather. It carried something ancient, just awakened. Lucas said nothing. He simply looked at her. The look of someone who had walked through years, through lifetimes, just to meet again the one who once held his hand in their final moment. Natalie stepped slowly onto the porch. Her footsteps echoed on the wooden boards like knocks on the door of memory. She stopped at the top step, only a few yards from him, but that space felt like the gap between two worlds.
How did you know I'd be here?
I didn't know, I just felt it. The same way you once followed the feeling to find me.
His voice was hoarse, tired but steady. Not the voice of someone delirious, not the voice of someone fresh out of ICU. Natalie stepped back slightly, her hand instinctively gripping the chain in her coat pocket, a necklace she didn't remember wearing, but now felt like part of her body.
You walked.
I left the hospital at dawn. No one stopped me. No one saw. Maybe because I don't belong there.
And this place, do you belong here?
Lucas took one step past the gate. His hands clutched the coat collar, his shoulders soaked.
I'm not sure this place exists in the present, but it's the last place you chose to keep your memory. And that mark, it only opens when you're ready.
Natalie clasped her hands tightly. Her heart pounded like ritual drums calling back the soul. She turned inside, opened the door wider. No words of invitation, but enough. Lucas stepped over the threshold. His wet shoes left prints on the wooden floor. She handed him a dry towel, but he barely used it. Instead, he looked around. Every item in the house felt strangely familiar. She didn't remember seeing them, but the feeling of touching them, dusting them, placing them there, was stronger than any logic. Lucas stood before the fireplace, A tilted frame rested there inside. 2 faded photos, a woman in lace, a man with a blurred face. Lucas laid a hand gently on the frame.
You once said, if there ever was a life where we couldn't find each other, you'd leave a sign behind. And that sign would only reveal itself when you were ready.
And you believe in that?
It's not belief, it's memory.
Natalie didn't reply. She sank into the armchair by the window, gazing at the pine trees soaked in rain. It no longer felt like 2025. Time had pulled back, leaving only the 2 of them in a space beyond time. Lucas stepped closer to the wooden table, where she had left the journal. He opened to one of the last pages. The handwriting trembled. If you don't come, I'll pass through this life like the others. But if you do let me be the one to keep you this time. She didn't lift her head, but her voice was soft.
I was always the one to keep you. In every life.
And you always lost me, in every life.
Why? Would this time be different?
Lucas sat across from her. He didn't touch her, didn't get too close, but his voice had never been closer.
Because this time, you came first, even without your memories. That's what I've never managed before.
Wind rose through the trees, the pines whispered an old song, one they might have once heard in a life far away.
I don't know if I can believe this.
Then don't believe, just keep walking forward.
Natalie gripped the silver coin in her hand. This time, she gave it to him.
Tell me, who have I been?
Lucas took the coin. His hand was warm. Steady, not the hand of a man once bleeding on Longfellow Bridge. He closed his eyes and placed the coin back into her palm.
You were a nun who left her vows to save a fugitive, a nurse who dressed the wounds of a man labeled a traitor, a wife who buried a soldier after Gettysburg, a gravekeeper, waiting for a dream to return.
Natalie wept. She didn't know why. Didn't know if the tears came from the present or from something layered deep across lifetimes.
And this time, if you want, we don't have to lose each other again.
The rain kept falling all night, soft and steady. The wind rattled the window panes like a visitor knocking from the past. Lucas had drifted asleep in the chair by the fireplace, head tilted slightly to one side, his face wearing a peace that felt earned, like someone who had finally arrived after a journey across time. Natalie couldn't sleep. She sat by the table, the warm light of an old oil lamp casting golden ripples over the pages of the journal. Lucas's handwriting, if it truly was his, spilled across the pages like he had relived each life, each loss, again and again. But something didn't sit right. Every past life recorded his death in vivid detail, but not once did it mention what became of her. She flipped through the pages, slower this time. From plague-ridden Florence to Civil War Georgia. Every time. Lucas died. Natalie as the nun, the nurse. The lover always survived it. But after that, nothing, as if memory itself stopped recording, until she found it a thin piece of paper tucked between the last 2 pages. Different paper, different ink, like someone had slipped it in at the very end. The scrap was nearly transparent. Written hastily in pencil, the 8th time, not yet ended, the one who leaves this world is her. Natalie's hands trembled. She read it again.
Her, not Lucas, not him. This time, she dies.
She laid the paper on the table, leaned back, eyes staring at the ceiling. No thunder, no dramatic music, just the rain, the wind, and the thud of her own heart growing faster, louder. A flash of memory hit her, like lightning across the mind. She was lying in the street, blood soaking her coat, Lucas screaming her name, cradling her, saying, "It should have been me." Natalie leapt to her feet, rushed to the bookshelf. She tore open drawers, flung open cabinets across the old wooden house. She didn't know what she was looking for, only that something was waiting to be found, not a dream, but a fact. A warning. In the lowest drawer of the writing desk, she found it, a set of printed documents newer than anything else in the house. Medical records. She picked them up. The header read, Unverified Medical Report, Inpatient Case Num 8942, Cardiology. Beneath that, the patient's name, Natalie Quinn. She froze. The date on the file, November 6, 2025, tomorrow. The final note, written by hand, prognosis 65%, risk of sudden cardiac arrest, patient unaware of condition. Special monitoring advised if exposed to neurological triggers. She dropped the pages. Disbelief and certainty collided in her chest. Lucas was no longer asleep. He was standing behind her. She hadn't heard him move. His voice came soft, steady from behind.
You saw it, didn't you?
How do you know?
Because this time, you're not the one who saves. You're the one who needs saving.
Natalie turned to him. Her face wasn't angry or scared. It looked like a mirror that had just cracked, revealing something buried beneath.
I'm going to die.
No, you're alive, and we still have time. But only if you believe in what you've never allowed yourself to believe.
You mean believe in you?
Believe in what you've always known but buried across centuries.
She stepped back, sank onto the edge of the chair. Her fingers still clutched the slip of paper, the one that said, her. Her heart felt strangled, yet somehow lighter, in a way she couldn't explain.
All the past lives were leading to this.
No, they were reminders. This is the first time that counts.
She didn't cry. She just looked at him for a long time.
Then what do we do now?
Lucas knelt, his hand resting gently over hers. He spoke in a whisper, like someone finally reunited with the soul he'd been waiting for since the beginning of time.
We find the ending that's right. The one where you don't lie down alone. The one where for the first time I'm the one who saves you.
Early morning in Boston. The wind off the Charles River swept along the iron rails of the Longfellow Bridge, carrying the scent of cold water, rusted steel, and something else, something like memory. Natalie stood still in the center of the bridge, the very spot where she had first met Lucas, where her coat had been soaked in blood from a single fated blade. But this morning there were no sirens, no blood, just her and Lucas, and a silent premonition, like a prayer still waiting to be spoken. Lucas stood beside her, breathing steady, without a word. Natalie knew he was thinking the same thing she was of the last moments, in every life. She had once stitched his wounds in Florence, once cradled his dying body in revolutionary Paris, once screamed his name on the battlefield of Georgia, but never, not once, had she been the one to be held. He had always been the one to die. She turned to him. Lucas's eyes carried no fear, no hope, only one thing: resolve.
Why does it always have to be Longfellow Bridge?
Because this is the end point of everything. I've died here, every time, in different ways, like fate etched itself into this iron.
And me.
Lucas didn't answer right away. He reached into his coat, pulled out a small, folded piece of aged paper. He unfolded it and handed it to her. The ink was blurred, but still legible. If the loop remains unbroken, death will reverse. The one who stays will be him. But if he remembers first and arrives in time, she can live. Natalie read it again and again, no signature, no date. But something inside her knew it was hers, as if her own hand had written it.
Where did you find this?
Tucked in the journal, in the missing page. I hid it from you, because if you saw it, you wouldn't have let me come here.
You've died for me 7 times. And now you're risking it again.
Lucas stepped closer, eyes calm like water.
I didn't die for you. I died so you could live. But you didn't. Not really. You only kept breathing in lives without me.
Her words caught in her throat, not because they hurt, but because they were true. She remembered now. Not every life, but enough to know surviving without him wasn't life. It was endurance.
If I die this time, will you live?
No, I'll just carry the debt.
A distant horn echoed across the bridge, not loud, but familiar. Natalie turned toward it. A large truck rolled toward them, not speeding, not swerving. But Lucas suddenly tightened his grip on her hand.
Do you believe in signs?
I do now.
He pulled her a few steps back from the red brick walkway. The truck passed without incident. No crash, no danger. But a raindrop landed squarely on the paper in her hand, smudging it. She looked down. Now only a fragment remained. Remembers first and arrives in time. She can... Her hands shook. She looked at Lucas. He gave a slight nod.
That's what I feared most. That I'd arrive too late. That you wouldn't believe. That you wouldn't open that door in your memory.
Natalie stepped back. The river wind tugged at her coat. She looked directly at him.
But I did come. I did remember. I'm here.
He stepped forward, took her hand for the first time in this life. But it wasn't unfamiliar. It felt like muscle memory of the soul.
And this time, you're not the one holding me back. I'm the one holding on to you.
Suddenly, Natalie froze. A sound echoed inside her, a voice not from the present, but from memory. A night, a stone bridge, blood on her hand. She'd written a message in blood in her journal. If he finds me first, bring me to where it ends. There, I will choose again. She collapsed. Lucas caught her, holding her close.
I remember now. I wrote that prophecy. Not someone else. Me.
Because you knew, even before this life began.
Natalie burst into tears, not from fear, but from release, from finally letting go of a nameless memory she'd carried too long.
So what now? What do we do?
We live, but not just for now.
He pointed toward the end of the bridge where that night the ambulance had once stopped. But today, there was no one lying there. No blood, no sirens, just wind, and the pale light of a new dawn breaking slowly over the river.
Because for the first time, the ending isn't here anymore.
The wind on Longfellow Bridge tonight carried the chill of December, slicing through thick coats like needles against skin. The bridge lights glowed a faint amber, blurred and foggy like memories without form, shining down on damp pavement beneath the bridge. The Charles River was black as ink, still as glass, reflecting a Boston that felt both familiar and distant. Natalie stood in the middle of the bridge, her hand pressed to her chest. The pain had returned, not from any wound, but from deep within, as if her heart was being pulled in every direction by invisible threads tied to hundreds of memories, hundreds of deaths that had never truly happened, yet still lingered. Lucas ran to her side, his face pale with concern. He didn't need to ask, he knew.
It's begun. You feel it, don't you?
Like someone slicing my heart one thread at a time. It doesn't hurt. It just feels like losing.
The loop is trying to close itself. If we don't act, you'll go. Just like I did in every life before.
Natalie sank to the side of the bridge, trembling. The wind tossed her hair like it was unraveling every truth in her chest. She looked up at Lucas, not as a doctor, not as a lover, but as a soul standing at the edge of something irreversible.
I'm tired. I don't want to lose again. Not you. Not me. Nothing.
Lucas reached into his coat and pulled out a small black wooden box, carved by hand, coated in dust and age. He opened it, revealing a slim glass vial filled with a deep blue liquid that shimmered like liquid emerald under the streetlight.
This is memory in liquid form, made from promises never kept, and deaths never forgotten. Drink it, and you'll remember everything. Not hints, not fragments. Everything.
And after that,
If you choose to enter the ritual, the loop breaks. We won't be reborn. No more lives. No more chances. If either of us dies, we're gone.
and if I die after that,
Then you'll dissolve like you never existed.
Silence stretched wide as the river. A car horn sounded in the distance like it belonged to another world. Natalie reached out and touched the vial. It was cold. Cold down to the bone.
I don't want to disappear. But I want even less to repeat.
She uncapped the vial, drank immediately. Her body jolted, her eyes widened, breath shortened. Lucas caught her before she fell. Then he drank the rest. Below the bridge, the water began to glow not from city light, but from something deeper. Older, like memory itself, was surfacing from the riverbed. The bridge vanished, the wind stilled, lights died. Sound was pulled out of the world, like someone turning the volume of existence all the way down. When Natalie opened her eyes, she and Lucas stood in a vast white expanse. No sky, no ground, just a circle of light around them. And within that circle, memories began to rise. Florence, plague. Paris, guillotine. Georgia, gunfire. New York, Christmas Eve. Boston, storm, rain, blood. Natalie collapsed. Lucas caught her, but his eyes were wet now too. For the first time, they remembered together. Everything. A door appeared made not of matter, but of shared memory and light. Lucas looked at her, voice thick with emotion.
If you walk through with me, everything ends. But for the first time, we begin.
And if I don't,
You die here and dissolve. No rebirth, no return.
Natalie stood, legs trembling. She didn't look at the door. She looked at him.
I've loved you through so many lives. But this is the first time I choose you, not because of memory, not because of fate, but because I want to.
She stepped forward, took his hand. Together they crossed the threshold. White light flared. Wind returned. Sound returned. Everything returned. But this time there was no loop waiting ahead. The first morning after the ritual came without bells or omens. No divine light, no supernatural sign, only sunlight slipping through white curtains, laying a soft golden dust across Natalie's cheek like sunlight settling over old memories. She opened her eyes, for the first time in years. There were no fragmented dreams chasing her, no strange names echoing through her mind, no gasping as if surfacing from deep underwater. Just steady breathing beside her. Lucas was still asleep. His arm draped lightly over her, not claiming, not holding, just present. Natalie turned gently, facing him, his darker skin, the faint scar near his temple. He was still the Lucas she had always known. And yet, this was the first time he belonged to a reality that would not repeat. She placed a hand on his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heart.
Still here. We're still here.
In the kitchen, coffee started to brew. The soft bubbling and warm aroma felt like life beginning again, no prologue needed. Lucas stirred awake, not startled, just a blink, followed by a small, quiet smile.
You woke up first.
I always do.
No, before. You woke from nightmares. What woke you today?
I didn't want to miss the first morning where I'm not waiting for you in another lifetime.
They sat at the small wooden table, 2 mugs of coffee, a few slices of toast. No one mentioned last night, no one asked, do you remember? Because for the first time, neither had to wonder whether their love lived in someone else, somewhere else, in some other time. Lucas picked up a scrap of paper on the table, her grocery list. Written in blue ink, almond milk, green apples, dish soap, brown rice.
You forgot coffee.
I remembered, but I wanted you to buy it. Because from now on, everything's for 2.
He folded the list, slid it into his wallet, said nothing, but his eyes said everything. That afternoon, they walked through the park, stood in line for sandwiches. No one noticed them. No one called them by the wrong name. No stranger looked at them and said, "Have we met before?" Everything started as it should, like a first time. Natalie asked him as they sat on a stone bench beneath the last of the autumn maples.
If you had no memories, would you still choose me?
If you were the first person I ever met, I'd still choose you, because I don't need a promise to know I want to stay.
I've spent lifetimes living for broken promises. Now, I just want to live for what you said.
They sat in silence for a long while, the stillness around them as calm as a winter lake. In Natalie's heart, there was no resistance, no war, no shadows. She didn't need Lucas to mention Florence, Paris, or old Boston, didn't need to relive old vows, because now they weren't living inside promises. They were living inside the present, every breath, every touch, every quiet morning. As evening fell, they went home. Natalie cooked dinner. Lucas set the table. They ate, washed dishes, listened to jazz on an old radio, then read an old book together, each taking turns. Nothing extraordinary happened. And that was the most miraculous thing of all across all their lifetimes, a life where love didn't need to prove itself through tragedy. The night in Boston was unusually still. Their small third-floor apartment sat tucked away on a quiet street, where golden light from the street lamps spilled across the windows like the glow of a past that refused to be forgotten. Lucas sat by the window, holding an old yellow envelope, no return address, no postmark, just a familiar scent, ink and wood smoke. Natalie was doing the dishes in the kitchen when she heard him call out,
Babe, come here.
She wiped her hands, walked over, and leaned against the back of the chair. In Lucas's hand was a blurry black and white photograph, clearly a cobbled street corner, a tilted church tower, and a cloaked figure standing with their head bowed. Natalie frowned. She recognized it instantly. Florence, Italy, the year 1348.
That's where you died the first time.
Lucas nodded and flipped the photo over. A single line written in reddish-brown ink. In an old Italian dialect, but they could both understand it. As if the words echoed directly in their minds, to know why love must pay a price, return to where it first began. Natalie clenched her fists.
No. We ended this. The ritual closed every loop.
The loops, but not the source.
He stood, walked to the old bookshelf, and pulled out a worn, leather-bound journal, the one they'd written in after the ritual, logging every recovered memory. He flipped to a specific page, marked with a red ribbon. On the page was a sketch of an ancient stone well, the first place they ever met in Florence, when Natalie was a healer and Lucas a plague-stricken farmer. He whispered,
Maybe. The ritual shattered the loops, but it didn't seal the original fracture, and now it's calling us back.
For what? If we go back and someone dies?
This time, there's no more looping, no rebirth. If you die, it's final. But if we don't go back, whatever's calling us won't stop. Can you feel it?
Natalie closed her eyes. In her chest, something was knocking slow, deliberate, like a church bell tolling through the fog, a call from far away, deep within her soul, one she couldn't ignore.
I feel it. Like a part of my memory that's never been opened. Like if I don't go back, it'll rot inside me.
Lucas took her hand, placing the photo between them.
Then this time, we're not going to save each other. We're going to save the love itself from its beginning.
They arrived in Florence on a misty February afternoon, the air cold and damp, sharp against the skin. The ancient city unfolded like a faded painting, red-tiled rooftops streaked with moss, winding cobbled streets weaving through the hills, and tall, shuttered windows that seemed to trap stories never told. Lucas and Natalie stepped out of the train station, no luggage, no map. They didn't need either. Every stone beneath their feet whispered their names. Every crumbling wall held fragments of memory still unbroken. Lucas led her through a narrow alleyway that opened into a wide stone piazza. There, just as it had lived in their memory, stood an old well. Its stone rim overgrown with moss, its edges worn smooth by time. Natalie stopped, eyes locked onto it.
This is where I washed your blood from my hands.
And where you first spoke my name. When the city called me plague-born, you called me a man.
The wind swept through the empty square. No one else spoke. They stepped down the shallow stone steps surrounding the well. When Natalie's fingers brushed its edge, the still water began to tremble. Water began. No wind, no rain, nothing touched it, but ripples spread across the surface. Then from the water's depth, images began to rise like reflections in an ancient mirror, a makeshift hospital under canvas. Natalie kneeling beside Lucas, his breath shallow. She cut her own palm, let blood drip onto his lips. A priest burst in, shouting in old Latin, "You've cursed your own soul, girl." Natalie dropped to her knees, her hands shook. She whispered,
It wasn't a loop. It was a curse. I was the one who cast it.
Lucas stood frozen in the mirror of water. He saw her on her knees, hands bloodied, eyes wet, begging some ancient force to hold on to his soul, not let him die. But the price was that they would relive that love again and again until one of them dared to let the other go.
You cursed us both, because you couldn't bear to lose me.
Natalie bowed her head to the well, not in shame, but in realization. For lifetimes, she thought she was the one left behind, but in truth, she had chained them both to fate.
I didn't know. I just wanted to keep you.
You did, but you didn't let me live, or let yourself love freely.
The water inside the well shifted from ashen grey to a deep, glowing green. A voice echoed from within, low and distant like a church bell lost in fog. You have remembered. You have known. Now choose, once and for all, release love or cling to destiny. Natalie lifted her head. Her eyes were dry. No tears, no resistance, just a voice, calm as still water.
I release it. I don't want destiny anymore. I choose love unbound and mortal.
Lucas nodded, took her hand. They turned away from the well, no plea, no waiting for a divine response, because they understood true freedom comes only when those in love are willing to let go if they must. As they stepped out of the square, light flared behind them just for a moment, then disappeared. And for the first time since breaking the loop, the Florence sun rose full and bright above their heads with no shadow following. They landed back in Boston on a late winter Sunday afternoon. The plane descended slowly, slicing through layers of grey clouds as if clearing a path for something small but sacred, the return of two people who now knew exactly who they were. By the window, Natalie rested her head on Lucas's shoulder. She didn't sleep. She was quiet, her hand holding his, not out of fear of losing, but to remember she still held on. Lucas stared out the window, watching the runway stretch beneath a somber sky. He didn't say a word, but in his eyes there was light, no trace of past lives' ache, no fear of another loop, just a quiet certainty this time was real. They left the airport and headed straight home. No one asked, "Are we okay?" No one pretended to return to normal life. They simply lived as if that so-called normal was the greatest miracle they'd ever reclaimed. That night, Natalie wrote the first line in their old leather journal since everything changed. "When I stopped holding you by vow, I finally held you with my own hands." Lucas was in the kitchen, the sound of running water, the scent of garlic sizzling in olive oil. The kitchen, once cold and quiet, had become sacred again, not because of miracles, but because of presence. After dinner, they played an old jazz vinyl, the same one they bought on their first walk after the ritual. They didn't dance. They just sat across from each other, fingertips touching, eyes meeting. Then Natalie asked, suddenly,
What if one day I forget? Not because of a curse or magic. Just age, illness, memory fading. What will you do?
Lucas didn't answer right away. He looked at her for a long moment, then spoke, softly.
I'll tell you everything, not the lifetimes. But the mornings we overslept, the nights we forgot to do the dishes, the fights over groceries. All the tiny things no one writes stories about, but together, they're a love too full to ever need another rebirth.
Natalie smiled, then rested her head against his shoulder. Her voice was low.
And this time, if I go first, will you keep living?
Not to wait for you, but to tell your story.
They sat in silence. The record spun to its final track. The room glowed in the soft warmth of yellow light. No more magic. No more trials. But Natalie's heart, after centuries, beat light and free, like someone newly born with nothing left to owe the world, because she wasn't holding on anymore, and no one was holding her back. There was only one person who stayed, willingly, until the very end. On an early spring morning, the Boston sky was so clear you could trace the jet streams like chalk lines across a blue canvas. Sunlight poured through the windows, spreading over the honey-toned wooden floor, over the shoulders of the woman making coffee, over the hands of the man folding napkins, one by one.
There was nothing extraordinary, nothing that needed explaining.
They had lived like this for years, through long winters and brief springs, through flu seasons and job losses, bland dinners and unexpected kisses, arguments that ended in silence, and quiet returns to the same side of the table. No one spoke of Florence anymore. No one asked about the past. The memories remained, but they no longer imprisoned, like a mountain behind them vast, but no longer in the way. Natalie worked at a small clinic near the elementary school. Lucas ran a second-hand bookshop, no ads, no flashing signs, just a little bell that rang each time someone walked in. And one afternoon in October, when the leaves began to fall like sunlight, saying goodbye, Natalie sat by the window, writing in their worn leather journal, "Love isn't what we hold on to with will. It's what remains when we've let everything else go." Lucas brought her a cup of cinnamon tea, his hands trembling slightly with age.
Writing again today.
Just a note for tomorrow, me, in case tomorrow me forgets.
Then I'll read it every day, until tomorrow you comes back.
They weren't young anymore, but they weren't as old as people imagined two souls might be after walking through centuries, just to hold on to one thing, only to realize in the end that it was that very thing holding them, peace. As night fell, Natalie turned off the reading light and rested her head on Lucas's shoulder.
Do you know what I love most about this life?
Not me.
No. That I got to choose you. In the simplest way. Not because of fate. Not because of destiny. Just because I liked you.
Lucas laughed softly and pressed a kiss to her forehead. Outside the window, wind passed through the maple trees and leaves swirled in the lamplight like slow spinning coins. And in that deeply human stillness, their story came to a close, not with grand events, not with bells or divine light, but simply by continuing. No loop returned, no fate reclaimed them, only a love small, quiet, but enough to last a lifetime. Thank you for listening to the story. If you have any thoughts, feel free to share them in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. Once again, I'm really happy to have you here. Don't forget to subscribe so we can keep sharing more stories about life together. Take care and see you next time.